What's up, viewer? This is the Video Game Hour.
Yep.
And wow, you can see us. You're finally putting some faces to names.
Speaking of, my name is Yussef.
And I'm Tavit. And yeah, we've been your hosts as the podcast format for the last two and a half years. And we decided, because this is our 20th episode, we would actually switch it up and try video for the first time. Well, not for the first time.
Yes, we have experimented with formats before. We did a beginner's hour, but this will be another experiment. We like to experiment. We like to try new things.
Yeah, we like to try new things. Exactly.
So we're still releasing the audio podcast, but we'll also do a video one and put it up on YouTube and see how that goes.
Yeah, hopefully you guys will enjoy this format and see my weird Muppet face making weird Muppet faces.
Flapping them gums.
And I thought, it would be really interesting because this is also, on our 20th episode, it might be a really good time for us to sort of like look back and retrace our steps, because we've been doing this now for over 2 years and it's been kind of a labor of love for us. So I thought it'd be interesting to sort of kind of reintroduce ourselves now that we're in a new format.
So allow me to reintroduce myself.
Allow me to reintroduce myself. And since the Bronx will always lead, why don't you take it away?
Of course. So yeah, it's kind of fun because we listened to some of our earlier episodes. So I went back and listened to the first one where we did introduce ourselves. And I'm still working in motion design. I work in television and motion graphics and animation, and that's where I get my paper. But I also I have been since then doing a lot more writing in games, and I've gotten pieces published in Waypoint, which is a vertical of Vice, and Paste magazine, in Unwinnable, which is a monthly magazine, and just getting my stuff out there and blogging a little bit, just like really, I did a lot of writing in college and had to put it aside to focus more on video and motion graphics. So being able to stretch those muscles again and get those working, and I think the podcast has been very instrumental in that, in terms of being able to talk and find a critical voice, basically. Because the first episode, it's still rough. We're figuring out what to talk about, whether to be like 8 out of 10, good game, mechanics, 8, soundtrack, 5,
story,
7. Could have been longer. I want my money out of this purchase.
Yeah, it was.
Consumer report style. It's like, or super dry academic. Like ludonarrative dissonance talk.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of options to choose from, and I think we've so far spent 20 episodes figuring out those options. So that's me.
Totally. And me, I was coming actually from the video games industry. I worked for many years in 2 tours of duty at Atari, which is a global video games publisher, which has made some great and some not so great games, but a really great group of people that worked there, and left there shortly after we started making our podcast. And that was actually my second tour of duty. Between my tours of duty at Atari, I was actually also partner at Killscreen Magazine, which is a video game arts and culture company, which has a print publication, but also a daily website. And when I joined their business, I actually joined to sort of make games for them. I started the very short-lived Killscreen Manufacturing, Killscreen MFG, and we did a whole bunch of really fun small games and events, some cultural, some just a great party, some like promotional. We did like a Fright Night, what was it called? I can't remember. It was like Fright Night or something, like a play on Friday for Capcom, which was like a showcase of all of their horror games. We did the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York's first ever video games themed exhibit and opening party. And just a whole bunch of other stuff. We launched an Incubus album with a really, actually way deeper than it should have been, side-scroll beat-em-up game. But since then, I've actually kind of steadily moved away from the profession of video games. I'm now Associate Creative Strategy Director, which is a whopping title, which means very little, at a company called Code and Theory, which is like a creative agency. We make things and business strategies for companies. I basically take luxury internet companies and make them better, more, slightly better.
Yes.
So it's weird stuff. It's not games at all. So in a weird way, you've kind of been moving steadily towards games through your critical writing and through this podcast. And I've kind of just been moving back to playing games and just kind of enjoying them as a general consumer. So it's been a really interesting kind of crisscross.
Yeah, ships crossing in the podcast seas.
Started with like me being, as you called it, inside baseball. Like I remember some of the earlier episodes, I'd always have something to say about like the process of. Yeah, I knew people who made the games. Yeah, I knew the Wolfenstein guys. And always had some perspective that came from like the often painful process of actually making games and publishing games. To just really talking about them as a cultural consumer, someone who enjoys and holds games up on the same level as I do films or literature or music. And really, I thought it was also interesting because as I went back and listened to some of the themes that we explored, I realized, like, again, how much, like, kind of how we play things or how we interact with things, like, says a lot about us. Like, I realized that, like, the more that I would listen to the episodes, the more I realized that, of course, we're talking about the games, and of course, we're talking about ludonarrative dissonance and all sorts of other cultural touch points that the games remind us of. But in a lot of ways, we were like talking about ourselves, and I found that really interesting. So it was pretty cool. My old business partner, Jamin at Killscreen, had this analogy that he would always use when we were talking about the power of play, where he talked about his a friend of his who was going to get married into a Chinese family. And they couldn't speak the same language, basically. He and his now wife could speak the same language, but he and his soon-to-be father-in-law could not speak the same language. So one way that they got to know each other was they sat down and they played mahjong together. And so through that interaction of playing a PvP board game, a strategy game, they learned essentially whether they would, be quick to take risks, were they conservative, how did they move their pieces around the board. This can say a lot about you. So I thought it might be interesting to like kind of take a tour back through some of our favorite episodes and not so favorite episodes as well, and just
how the games we've talked about, what they say about us, and what they say about the world too. Because the world has changed significantly in the past 2 years.
Hasn't it?
Hasn't it just?
Hasn't it just? So I guess, should we like take it all the way back?
I think we should. Episode 01.
01, which was
Wolfenstein.
Yeah, Starbreeze were still the guys who did like the Riddick first-person games, which are fucking ridiculously awesome. Pardon the pun.
Was it fun?
Ridiculously
awesome.
awesome.
I'm sorry.
I'm still making puns.
I'm sorry.
Apologies.
Wolfenstein. It's irrelevant because, of course, it not only is it getting a sequel, but it's also a game about killing Nazis.
Oh yeah,
punching Nazis.
That one's unfortunately come back around.
I wish only the sequel part came back.
Yeah, really.
The Nazi part is also here.
Yeah,
and it's a game. When we talked about it, we talked about its ability or its inability to live up to its moral framework, whether it felt like it was doing enough to kind of justify that World War II setting, that Nazi setting. A game that basically doesn't have Hitler. It has an analogy for him, and doesn't really have concentration camps as much as it has like work camps or something a lot more, I guess, sterile and approachable, palatable to a mainstream audience. So the sequel is going to be set in America and same alternate history where the Nazis are running things. And I guess the question that is going to be important is that moral framework going to live up to its premise?
Are they going to play softball with Nazis again, essentially?
Yeah, and also something that had been brought up as well is the tag. A lot of the marketing and the tagline for the game was, "We need to make America great again or free again," and that kind of belies the reality of the fact that the German Nazis used American segregation and Jim Crow legal strategy to base their worldview off or help build their worldview.
Totally.
So it kind of, the game in its inherent premise presupposes that America was good until the Nazis got here,
right?
And the reverse, the danger of making an alternate history, as we're also seeing with the Confederate show, is that by creating a hyperbolically super racist or fascistic in a certain direction piece of media, you are making assumptions about the real world, about how life works outside of that media, and there's always the danger of that. Are you critiquing our actual world, or are you justifying what we're going through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're normalizing the concept.
Yeah, normalizing.
Yeah, it's a really
The
interesting.
status quo, basically.
It's a terrible line to have to say that it's being walked poorly, but I think it is being walked poorly all the time. Like there's this idea that that we're post-racist, post-Nazi, post all these things that I think has created a kind of, to use the very word that are often tossed back in the liberal space, like it's created safe spaces for these terrible ideas to continue to fester. I think as a society, America has, and this is something that's new to me, I don't even feel 100%, like this is one of the changes that I've gone through since the 2 years ago where we started this, sort of podcast. Like if I look back on myself when we were recording the Wolfenstein episode, I think I was still very much in like a neoliberal way of thinking. We both went to school together. We went to a school system that started with in my case, the ethical culture school, and in your case, Fieldston Lower.
No, I had been in like the public school.
You've been in the public school system. Yeah. So basically, we both went to Fieldston as in high school, and one of the schools that feeds into it, it used to be called the Working Man School, and it's the Ethical Culture School, now it's known as, which of course is like the most incredible liberal, institution of, and I mean like neoliberal, like this idea that like
capital L liberal.
Capital L liberal, exactly, like freedom for all, no idea should be suppressed. It's a really like constitution thumping way of looking at civil society. It's really just the concept of Westphalian civil society. And what's interesting is that I've gone through kind of a change, because I think especially really recently with this resurgence of like an out sort of Nazi and neo-national party here in America, and with the ongoing police brutality, the racism of the criminal justice system, I can't call it a justice system, but like the ongoing racism in America, I've been kind of beaten into exhaustion trying to like justify my old worldview. And I don't know exactly where I'm going to land yet.
Sure.
But it was around the time where Richard Spencer, the alt-right guy, got punched in the face right around the Trump inauguration, where I realized that I think it's cool to punch a Nazi in the face. And that was really flying in the face of my old way of thinking of like, no, all perspectives should be welcome to the table. Certainly some are morally reprehensible, but we need a civil way of, blah, blah, blah dialogue. I just don't know if I fit so cleanly into that perspective anymore. And I can't say for sure where I fall now. Like I'm certainly not advocating violence for violence sake, but I think there has to be, I think maybe if you carry the idea of tolerance out to its extreme, I think it ends up actually creating unsafe conditions for tolerance itself to survive. So I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure where I fall yet.
I think,
but it's a new thought.
It's a question that's applicable because, 2 years ago, I think the question of talking to a Nazi was an academic one, hypothetical one.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Klan is still around in the U.S.
Exactly.
The police have a lot of that going on in their ranks.
The new Klan,
basically, but it was a lot more underground, and just the idea of it surfacing raises those questions in a way that it's unclear whether a game like Wolfenstein is prepared to help us answer.
Right.
Because the very question that society is asking is, how to deal with Nazis now.
Yeah.
Before, and it's the way that history sanitizes and flattens out quandaries, because a lot of the same arguments being used to kind of bolster both sides of the argument, or both sides of the divide, and that encourages civil discussion, were happening around World War II, where they're like, a lot of American mainstream media was saying, give them a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
They, sure, they're obviously bad, but, we can't just go around killing whoever we disagree with.
Be un-American!
Until, then we had a cascading series of events that we now know as World War II and the Holocaust. So you don't see the reality. I mean, it's very easy to not see things getting out of control. It's very easy to not see the danger of an ideology when you're, not only at the same timeline as it, but also in a timeline where, like right now, where everything is so distracting and
so easy
to get lost in. So I think that's a question that you're coming to.
Yeah, that's exploring it,
and I am as well. And we're liberal and mainstream values butt up against harsh reality and physical danger and violence.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
and us in our privileged position, like, haven't necessarily had to deal with.
It's true. It's true.
So,
Yeah. So that's definitely like it's a monumental change. I think that we can track from our very first episode to now. It's like a personal change to obviously like a political change as well. Like America is seemingly a very different place than it was. I mean, the elements are all there. The elements have always been there.
Absolutely.
But I think maybe it's not that America's a different place, but America has a different danger, as you're saying, when those elements are out in the open and actually not cowering and not afraid and not kept to the shadows, but are being held up in the light and are not disappearing by being exposed, but are being
being reinforced.
Yeah.
And of course they're like, we talked about it during our Injustice 2 episode, which I recently had about, growing up in New York in the 90s and going to high school together, and police brutality being a very evident and ever-present problem, and it's always funny to me, seeing people talk about Black Lives Matter,
just getting woke now.
It's a brand new thing.
Yeah.
No, we've been marching against this stuff for decades. So it's really more about, I don't know. It is about the mainstream having to deal with this.
Exactly.
It's always been there in the fringes. So now it's here. So
absolutely.
So we can move on.
We can move on. Shortly after that, we talked about this game called the Talos Principle.
Yeah, which is our second episode. So and that episode I liked a lot because it really helped. I think it kickstarted our ability to dissect games, because it was a game that we came at from we had very different reactions. Very different reactions to that shit. Yeah. And obviously describe yours, which is very strong.
Talos Principle, I fucking hated, and it's actually I think it's a really strong episode, even though I didn't like the game. Because Yussef had a very different reaction. He really enjoyed the game. You're still working through the DLC now, right?
Working through
it. But I was completely put off by the game, and I think it was one of those moments where I realized, myself as a budding critic, like as a budding cultural commentator, let's say, that it's really kind of difficult to separate the context of yourself from how you talk about the game. Because I've been dealing with even before we started the podcast, dealing with kind of an evolving relationship with the concept of God. I'm an atheist, and I was raised in going to the Armenian church here in New York. My grandmother was my Sunday school teacher, so God and church and shit played a big part of my life when I was a kid. But very quickly I realized that I was not party to that belief system when I was young. But it took me a long time to sort of come out with those feelings and really validate them. And so playing the Talos Principle, my lord, pun again, but my God, the booming narrator voice, I still hear it in my head, the voice of God in that game, the voice of the designer, as so fucking frustrating and so game breaking. It took me out of the game every single time. And I had no problem with the puzzles themselves, they were fine. The game design was fine, but I think the choice that game made to be so steeped in religious rhetoric and so pedantic with its God voice and its sort of Jesus cycle as the robot, I just was completely turned off from beginning to end. And I was just ranting about being an atheist for the entire episode.
Yeah. And what was cool about it was we started it off with you more speaking on the game on a general level and as just this bad experience, and then by the end of the episode we really narrowed it down to we were saying, the mechanics and the wrappings of the mechanics being at odds in your experience. So if it had been, we brought up Antechamber, which is another puzzle game very similar to that, and Portal, except that it really has no explicit narrative. It's all just context within the game, very very minimal, very very minimal, and you like that game, and for me, I needed more of a narrative hook, so I needed an explicit narrative to be there. So I guess it really what it depends on is not only if there's a story, but if that wrapping is pleasant to you, if it's comforting, and if it's the opposite of comforting, if it's off-putting. Yeah, if it's off-putting, it can, even if the mechanics are fine, it can really just make the game unplayable.
Yeah.
So that's like, I like that we're able to kind of unwrap the game in that way, and not like the first episode where we really got to the nitty gritty.
Exactly.
I feel like we really just like broke the game apart and laid it on the table and got such a good understanding of not only the game, but of our take on puzzle games and game narratives and mechanics.
I think that whole idea of like game narratives and their relationship to mechanics is something that we've talked about a lot throughout many of our episodes. I think, kind of flash forwarding a little bit more, another of the episodes that we had was on this game called Her Story.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one, I mean, if you guys haven't played Her Story yet, definitely still have to highly recommend that one. I think it's like iOS and Android, but it might be on some PC.
I feel like it's on everything, yeah.
Yeah, it might be on everything.
Maybe not console, but yeah.
Yeah, and Her Story is just, I remember at the time talking about how wonderful that sort of, there was no ludonarrative dissonance. It was this incredible story being told through a 90s computer terminal. Mm. And like the game took place within the computer, and your entire way of interfacing with the game mechanics was through a computer interface, was that computer interface. And you never really left the screen. And it was so kind of perfectly succinct. There's been other games that do this really, really well, like Papers, Please, and a whole bunch of games that are like just so kind of, their story elements are in such wonderful harmony with their gameplay elements. I feel like that's become like a major theme throughout a lot of our different episodes. But Her Story kind of like cinched it for me, where I was like, oh yeah, like we're talking about these games as cultural critics and not just like 8 out of 10 graphics. Really, that one was really a game that like it kind of snapped into place for me. It felt really, really good.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think we described it as like kind of almost a toy box or a narrative puzzle or narrative toy.
Yeah.
Because it's a game where the mechanics are very simple and limited, but they allow you to play with the narrative in a way that most complicated mechanical games don't, because you're basically, to sum it up, in the game to kind of progress, you are searching through a series of recordings by looking up keywords, but you can look up like one keyword at a time.
Yeah.
So you're trying to find threads throughout this one woman's recounting of a series of days or weeks. So your approach to that is very limited, but by limiting it, it makes it really take shape in your mind in a way that I think if you had full access to the information, it would just like, so the way to make, so by limiting your access and by limiting your input, it actually makes it gives a game more physicality. It gives like a story more physicality than if you were just being told it. And I think that's something that makes it so thoroughly a game and in some ways a toy, because you're kind of, it's not as much about the endpoint as it is about getting to, basically play with pieces of a story and fit them together, put square blocks and square holes. And
exactly. It really reminds me of how skeuomorphic the entire game is, because truly, like, even the typing sounds that were produced when you were typing on, depending on whether you're playing it on a touchscreen or a keyboard, I'd play it, obviously because it's like a full motion video game, I always had headphones on. And I was playing it on the iPad 2 at the time to like put some history back on this retrospective. So back in the iPad 2, typing on the software keyboard, but still the game insisted upon putting in these old like clacky clack keyboard sounds and like the sort of dot matrix style screen that was like, had scan lines and shit to it. Everything was just really skeuomorphic. It brought you into this world, and I think reinforces a lot of what you're saying, where it's like not classic video game, but kind of fits more into toy space, where it's the act of playing with the interface that produces it's an active form of play. It's not just like a video game world sitting there waiting for you to pilot an avatar through. You're just like picking up the entire experience and manipulating it directly.
Yeah, it's a kind of, a lot of times the word immersion gets thrown around, and it's not necessarily immersing you into the experience as much as it's just kind of cutting out the middleman by removing an avatar.
It's almost like a no-interface game.
Yeah,
weirdly enough.
Yeah, by making the interface so surface level and so so foregrounded, it really makes it feel like you are, like you're not in some world. Like the world is just like the screen in front of you,
Yeah.
which doesn't. Yeah, it's not exactly immersion. So it's like kind of a different category.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's really cool. Where were we, man? Damn, Her Story. When was that even? I didn't check the date on that shit.
so long.
When you think about it, it's like we're also like on videogamehour.com. You're probably already there checking this out. But where was it? Here we go. Beginner's Hour. Oh my god, we tried some different format stuff though. September 23rd, 2015. So we've been at this for a while, man.
We have. It's been a long time.
Holy moly! I guess I was at that point still working at Atari. That's crazy time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just want to look at when Wolfenstein came out.
Oh, that's all the way back. Crazy town.
Good radio. Lucas looking at our website.
January 18th, 2015.
Yeah, 2015.
Almost coming up on 3 years.
That's true.
Yeah.
In a couple of months.
All right.
That will be the case. But yeah, let's move on to next thing we wanted to talk about, which is The Witness.
Yeah, The Witness. And this was another one where I think it was kind of immediately apparent that we could no longer separate the criticism from the context. Like how we talked about games was, at least in the Witness episode, for me personally, it was just impossible to separate. Like I was going through a really, really rough time actually. During our playthrough of The Witness, it was this winter before I got married. Whoa, we got married. We both got married.
We're not married to each other.
we got married.
Yeah.
No, we both got married in the
Yes.
intervening times and started this podcast. But we were basically my now wife, my fiance at the time, was in Japan for like 6 or 7 weeks. Like it was like a long time. It's the longest time we've been apart. And we were also renovating our apartment, which should be a joyous time, but if you've ever renovated an apartment, you'll know it's a very, very difficult time. So from this totally privileged position of angst and woe, I was displaced from my home for the first time, like ever, basically. Like I could not be home because there were no walls. I was living with my mom, which again, totally lucky to have that ability, but as anybody knows, when you move back in with your folks, it's rough.
A tad bit infantilizing.
I was going through some rough times on a personal note too, just like dealing with like a whole bunch of crazy emotions. So during that time, to sort of cope with a lot of these things, I tried for the first time in my life meditating. And I was reading books on mindfulness, meditation practices, and daily, twice a day, doing meditation. And it was amazing. It was incredibly powerful. Like mind-changing, life-changing shit. And so I remember playing Witness, and now that I can put myself back in that place, meditation mind and playing the Witness mind were really similar to me. It was hard for me to separate what it felt like to play the Witness from when I was in the deep mind meditation state. So necessarily, that episode, when you go back and listen to it, or when I went back and listened to it, so much of what I was talking about was that experience of coming to meditation as a practice. And I really couldn't see beyond that. You know, so much of what I was holding the game up to, which I still haven't completed, by the way, so much of it was so much of it was really about putting my context, my sense of place into my experience of playing the game. And it's one of those things that I realize now that I do no matter what. Like, when I'm consuming media, when I'm reading a book, when I'm watching a movie, when I'm playing a game, you can't help but put yourself into it. And I think games are a remarkably ego-driven experience due to their interactivity. And I know on some episodes we've talked about this, like inhabiting the character really changes your relationship with the media and the medium. And I think no more apparent than our episode in The Witness, when I was like coming to meditation. It really just took over my entire play experience. But I know you had a very different reaction to The Witness.
Yeah, it was kind of like an inverse of our Talos episode, I think.
Yeah.
Where I really didn't like The Witness. And it was partially, again, tying to real life, my distaste for the creator.
Absolutely.
You know, I just don't like John Blow. I think he's very full of himself.
You're not the only person who thinks that way, you said.
And it's often something that's unfairly leveled at creators, but I just couldn't, detach my personal feelings from that. And I did give it a fair shake, and I played a good chunk of it, but it just not only because of the fact that it is so unending, and it kind of, I mean, there is like a shot to the end at some point, but you can also wander off course, and it doesn't always tell you when you're doing that. And that is an interesting part of the game, and the game I do totally respect that, like its ties to meditation and its ties to looking at nature in a different way. Like there's a really good video about the way the game kind of opens up, or just like kind of it does a lot for a game, and the way the game's world is so intricately designed.
Yes,
and I totally appreciate that, but it was really a case of it just not being for me. Like it was just I recognized in my dislike of it my own impatience with certain mechanics, and mechanics that really force you to unblock parts of your mind. Like that are challenging to the point where it's no longer a diversion. It's no longer a pastime. It's not strictly fun. It's really, I think Blow was going for more than that when he made the game. And respect the intent, but
fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy.
But it's interesting too, because maybe we do, but I don't hear very often in games criticism the tying of the artist or the creator to the consideration of the work. Like, we do this a lot with music. Society does this a lot with music, the judging of someone's music by their character. Mm-hmm. We do this with actors as well, in film and in television. Like, we are not able to enjoy the media that an artist has created once they've fallen from grace.
Yeah.
This has happened with lots of different artists, from the Woody Allens to the Cosbys to the, all sorts of walks that have, there's tons of it that goes on, and we can't really separate the art from the artist. Mm-hmm. But in games, we have some pretty despicable creators.
Sure.
And so often I think that there is a corner of games criticism that talks about that relationship, but I think on a mainstream level, maybe it's just the sort of virulent nature of the majority of games audiences right now, like the Gamergate kind of ness of it. But John Blow is a butt, mm-hmm. Definitely. He's definitely a butt, and that's vague intentionally. But I think also, you have guys like Notch, right? Like Notch, the creator of Minecraft, that luckily Microsoft took away from him. But really, when you think about it, like, that guy is a fucking shit-posting, like, neoconservative fuckwit, and he's the creator of, like, the only game you would trust alone with your children,
Beloved by children and families alike.
Beloved by children and families alike. Like, Grandpa plays fucking Minecraft, right? And yet the creator is a pretty despicable guy. I don't know, there's just something there. Is it something about the community that supports the medium, or is there something inherent in the medium that allows the separation of the creator and the art? Maybe it's tough in mass market games because there's such collective endeavors. They're like studio pictures, like hundreds of people work on the big AAA games. Mm-hmm. But a game like The Witness or a game like Minecraft, they're also tied to the story of being created by like one person, like a singular mind.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah, maybe
just all I can to add to it slightly is really to discuss like the great man mythology, that I think a lot of people we buy into as a culture because it's so we buy into meritocracy and to that aspect of capitalism where we want to believe that this man deserves to tell us what to do and tell us what to play because
they did it by their bootstraps.
Yeah, they're just so smart and talented.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe it goes to their head. Maybe they start to drink their own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
There's like this. I think there's an ongoing mythology that to be successful or talented, you have to be an asshole. Like Steve Jobs.
Oh yeah.
His autobiography is super popular, and he was a complete asshole to his family. Miserable person. Asshole to his employees. Made them work overnight. Yep.
Never ride an elevator with Steve Jobs. You'll lose your job.
Literally.
That was like a big, like, terrible urban myth about like the,
the
fear of the boss. Yeah, don't get into an elevator with Steve Jobs, or you will not have a job by the end of it.
Yeah. So I think there's that kind of assumption that goes into justifying like these powerful white dudes, like
but mainly white dudes.
Yeah, and like that then infects so many other things. Like for example, the Google memo coming out recently, where an employee wrote this shitty memo and that argued that women weren't physically able to compete with men,
and there were deep psychological differences
in terms of how they can think and how they can. It's just like complete pseudoscience.
Yeah, it's garbage.
Sexist garbage.
Misogyny, basically.
Which John Blow didn't completely discount and had tweeted.
You guys misunderstood.
Yeah, that
the
was
writer's intention.
So I think these things are super connected. Like the sexism in the industry and the attachment to these great these great mind mythologies that create people like Notch and John Blow, and even Ken Levine, who, he's a much different scale of creator. Like he's not a neoconservative as far as I can tell.
Sure, you can tell.
But his company was ended after BioShock Infinite, and all those workers were let go, and I don't think he was really that responsible when that happened. He saved a few of his cohorts, and then the rest of the workers were gone after that.
Yeah.
Despite probably having crunched for a year,
maybe
more than a year to make
fucking problem.
to follow his dream of the BioShock Infinite.
This kind of reminds me of an article. I'll find a link to it. We can link to it in the description. It's it was Ian Bogost, who's a prickly pear, but a really, really smart guy. And Ian Bogost did a fantastic article about the weird, underlying psychology of the people who basically birthed VR, and how VR is this intense power grab and power fantasy by these predominantly white nerdy men who grew up in the sort of weird science reality or Revenge of the Nerds reality, where they felt abused, they felt victimized by their great intelligence and by their weird hobbies and habits, and essentially it's creating this virtual space where they're all powerful. And I'm butchering the article, but it's totally well worth the read. It kind of feels connected.
Absolutely,
to
it sounds connected.
Yeah. VR launched in the time that we.
And who led that? But fucking Palmer.
But a fucking shit poster extraordinaire, Palmer Luckey.
It's
technology, man. What a shitty place to be.
Yeah, and because it's allowed to pass off as objective and pure because it's research based, and no way that research could be influenced by your ideology or your mental framework. So, I think that kind of sums up a lot of John Blow and The Witness. I mean, The Witness, I think, has a lot of value as a game, but
you were affected by the creator.
Yeah, I think it's worth continuing to discuss what it means when we attach importance to creators.
Yeah,
and when they kind of get big-headed and over that importance, and sometimes go over to the other side and jump the shark and end up being complete assholes.
Speaking of big heads jumping the shark, I think another really interesting episode that we did was actually Uncharted 4. Sorry, that was the perfect Nathan Drake. He's just got a really big head.
I was thinking
he jumps the shark.
Big-headed Nathan
I think he has a pretty big head, actually. Or maybe
above average.
Yeah,
size.
Slightly oversized head, that one.
Yeah.
But Uncharted 4 was cool because that episode was one of the first time that we kind of freaked our formula. We invited a guest on. And it was really great. I loved it. We've had guests for a couple of our other episodes as well. I think Mafia 3, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But Uncharted 4 was the first time that we invited a guest on.
It was Joe Russ.
Yeah, Joe Russ, who is creator of the upcoming game
Jenny LeClue,
yes. Which we're closer now.
Can't wait.
We're closer now. It's still in development, but it's closer now, so that's changed.
And he's in Florida, so here's hoping that you are safe, Joe.
Right now there's another thing that's changed, the climate. Bam. Yeah. You like that one? Boom. Making it
harder to play video games.
Yeah, because hurricanes are literally being lobbed at us rapid fire by a very angry and warm ocean.
Yes.
Which is warming, climate change is real. We also had a solar eclipse, so the Earth is round, So all you flat earthers can go probably already having sex with your mothers, but you can continue to do so, you inbred weirdo. Sorry, that's a little bit.
Yeah, rewind.
Uncharted 4.
And
heartwarming story of a genocidal maniac.
Love it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to bring it up mainly because of the guest thing. I think just to address that, we are going to keep bringing on guests. I think it's always really enriches the episodes when we bring them on, because we have our repertoire and our opinions and that we kind of share and bounce off of each other. But adding a third voice there really and I think enriches and kind of grows that discussion beyond what we could do just the two of us.
Yep.
Obviously, we're also two straight dudes, and we're trying to get as many different people, different kinds of voices, women, non-white people, get them involved with the podcast. I think a challenge obviously is that I know people on Twitter, but then they don't live in New York, and I like the physical, local nature of our discussions. I think it makes it easier to talk. As you can see, just two of us talking back and forth. It's a little bit, I think, more natural than Skype. Though Joe, we did bring him on Skype, and it was still fine. So I'm okay with continuing to attempt doing that. Yeah. Just thinking out loud about guests and trying to, figure out new ways to get people on the podcast.
Yeah, and actually, other than the guest as a sort of freak of our format, we've also messed with video before, which you may have seen. We did a couple of live streams on Twitch, which we sort of captured also on our website. So if you just keep on scrolling, you'll eventually hit some video. We did a full playthrough of Inside, which was super, super fun. Inside was the sequel to Limbo by Playdead Studios.
Speaking of climate change,
yeah.
Game.
Exactly. So yeah, we've tried video before, but as sort of a playthrough. We also did something called the Beginner's Hour. Beginner's Hour episode was where Yussef basically talked me through one of his favorite game series, the Souls sort of series of games. I think we were playing Bloodborne, or was it Dark Souls? Yeah, it's Bloodborne. Bloodborne, which is cousin to the Souls games, which I continuously buy but never finish. So Yussef was sort of showing me the ropes on that. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll keep doing more of those. I know you have some games that you hold dear to your heart, and that you'll hopefully get to explain to me why you feel that way.
It's true. Actually, kind of weirdly enough, and we didn't talk this through in the lead up to the show, but one of the elephants in the room that we've mentioned on a couple of the episodes was Metal Gear Solid. Why have we never played any of the Metal Gear Solid games, which I hold so near and dear to my heart? Other than Legend of Zelda, it's really just Metal Gear Solid, which is my favorite franchise of all time. And I think just to spoiler alert, I can't remember if it was the Witness episode or the one right after where we were talking about it. Metal Gear Solid, the Phantom whatever the fuck released. Yeah. The final Metal Gear Solid game with Hideo Kojima at the helm, and it was god awful. It was one of the worst games I've ever. I mean, mechanically it was fine, but to carry the Metal Gear Solid name as such a super freak fan as I was, it was more insult and injury than it was a good time. So,
maybe we can cover Death Stranding.
Maybe we can cover Death Stranding.
That would be kind of cool.
That would be really cool.
No promises, but
no promises. Maybe. Yeah. So yeah, another one. Yeah. Really, just to speak to the point, it's the Uncharted thing, having guests on, the Let's Plays, the Beginner's Hour. And even this video, we really like experimenting with format. It shows that we're not done. This process is becoming. And it's constantly evolving.
The reason we're doing this podcast to begin with is not only just to talk about games, but to grow how we talk about games. If we just are speaking about games over a beer or dinner, it's fine. But by forcing ourselves to embrace different formats, I think it changes the discussion because it makes it more serious. And more, I don't know, something that you're investing more of your energy and time in, and I think it's been super beneficial to us to do that.
Totally.
But speaking of different formats, we tried a format that never made it to air.
That's right!
No Man's Sky.
No Man's Sky. Here's something that did not end up making the cut. Kind of like our 256 episode. Yeah. One of our episodes, we went and recorded a bunch of stuff at the Killscreen 256 Festival, and promptly the data was corrupted, so we never actually got to do that. But another experiment, as Yussef was saying, we were playing through No Man's Sky when it first released. So the early access version of No Man's Sky.
Yes.
And to give the game a bit more story, which was so sorely lacking in that V1 release, Yussef and I decided to start doing audio recordings as if they were like captain's logs in our own ship or in our own sort of story.
Kind of a gameplay journal or diary that tracked some of the more interesting planets or places that we got to, and yeah, kind of role played as if we were literally leaving, space logs, like Star Trek style. And I think maybe owing to the flat nature of the game experience, it just didn't stick. Like it didn't, and it ended also being a lot of work to do extra audio logs in addition to the podcast.
Yeah.
So we never ended up publishing it. So it's kind of behind the scenes sort of.
Yeah, I still have my recordings somewhere.
Yeah, maybe we should put them on sometime.
That would be
like
funny.
Put over some footage.
Yeah,
try
totally.
and add some cool distortion effects.
Yeah, man. And we were basically we were ping ponging the logs as if because in the game there was much to the chagrin of anybody who was promised or multiplayer. By the trailers in the game, there was no real multiplayer when it launched. So we were just the plan was to record a bunch of these things and ping pong them back and forth as if we were finding each other's logs or whatever. But we kind of ran out of steam.
Kind of like a pen pal, space pen pal.
Space pen pals. Lovers in a dangerous space-time, if
Yes.
you were. Oh, another episode.
Yeah, so you should.
I'm just dropping shit. But the thing is, now I'm actually back in No Man's Sky. Now, a full 2 years later, the game is fucking aces. It's really, really fun now. They made a bunch of really large and really subtle changes to the game, and mind you, I'm only 6-7 hours into restart playthrough in the new version, but I'm loving it. A lot of the rougher edges have been smoothed out, and there's definitely there's substantially more, but just enough story. It's not so much story and not so pedantic, follow the critical path. It still has that really. I remember talking about how it's a very non-urgent game. There's nothing that forces me back to it the way that a linear narrative game might. It still has that relaxing get baked and play a game-ness to it, which I still love to do. But there's just enough forward momentum, and there's much more clarity about the game's systems that it just feels like a complete game, and it really is fun right now. So. I'm really enjoying getting back.
Better late than never. I appreciate that they are, releasing it and
working on it.
They're continuing to work on a game that they could have just left alone and done their own thing afterward. So I think they probably feel some sense of of ownership over the experience, where they want it to be as good as it can be.
Yeah, I gotta give them praise because they survived hell.
Absolutely,
those guys were put through the fucking ringer,
and mostly undeserved. It's just a game.
Yeah, it's just a game,
and people do not treat it as such, and that's really unfortunate. And that they've developed it further and made a more complete experience is great, but I don't think they needed to.
Yeah,
it was not owed to us.
It was not bad.
It was not bad.
It dropped off. It wasn't bad.
It was I enjoyed what I played of it. I feel like I got a good experience out of it until I eventually. There's plenty of games that I get bored of after a while. That's how it works.
Go to Twitter to burn them alive. Right?
Yeah,
and the thing is, I think meta lesson learned. It's really risky to promise people the entire galaxy. In all things, in games, of course, but in all things, don't promise people a galaxy.
Algorithms will not save us.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think another one where we had an interviewee was Sean Alexander.
Yeah.
Yep. We had Sean Alexander to come talk about Mafia 3. And Mafia 3, I think, for me, was another one of those moments where the game that I was playing was so succinctly matching up with kind of where I was contextually in my life and my own sort of explorations. Only because I had, as we were deciding to play Mafia 3, which is this big, very forward in terms of its depictions of racism in America, GTA style game, where you're this big hulking Vietnam vet. It's black dude returning to America after Vietnam to the Baton Rouge area, basically, right?
Sure. A fictional New Orleans.
A fictional New Orleans, and coming back into an incredibly racist society that does not want him there, and falling into a life of crime, as all good mafia games should do. And so I just happened to be, as I'm going into this game, It's incredibly racism conscious. I just happen to be finishing. I read about 80% of all of James Baldwin's written works, like his essays and his novels. And I had just reread for the first time since high school the autobiography of Malcolm X. So this was a time where, as you were referring to way before, like a lot of America was waking up. It was waking up to things that we had been, Yussef and I had been conscious to throughout going to police brutality protests through the 90s, but also just really hit home. I think there was a sort of cadence of horrible cases of police murder of predominantly black men, from everything from traffic stops to walking home from school or from work, from all walks of economic life and in all places in America. So I had felt very, personally, just it had incensed me to the point where I was starting to reread these books and read new books by prominent black voices. So I think picking up and playing that game, I was just ready. I was just very ready for that game's context, and so it kind of felt like another one of those moments where there was just a perfect kind of marriage of the context of the critic and the criticism itself.
Yeah, I think it was a good time to play it. It came out at a really opportune time, and it really influenced a lot of my thinking about games afterwards. For example, I think our very next episode was Hitman.
Oh God,
where you play the whitest guy imaginable.
The whitest guy,
and it was just so interesting to compare those experiences, and it led me to write a piece about the idea of the spy and why it's so necessarily white. And I had, speaking of concurrent reading, I was reading Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which is a really important book, and talking about a kind of a young black man's experience in the South and then Harlem, and the nature of being black in America, where you are invisible until you're not. You have little control over whether you are invisible, and in Hitman you have total control over whether you are invisible.
Yep.
And that's why it's so linked to this concept of whiteness, the ability to get away with all sorts of things that you couldn't if you were not white. So I think that, and in Mafia 3, that is definitely the case. For example, if you go in certain neighborhoods, people run away from you, cops come, call faster, or if you go in certain stores, you get kicked out, or they'll call, once again, bring the ever-present threat of the police down on you. And while there's a security threat in the Hitman stages, it's so easy to blend into the crowd, where it wouldn't be if you were, not white. So I think that playing Mafia 3 and then Hitman allowed me to really coalesce my opinion on, and my understanding, I guess, of this kind of visualized racism and this idea of the white gaze on non-white bodies. So I think, and we were kind of getting peripheral feedback that were were then interspersing within the game's structure and within the experience of playing the game. That enriched the experience a lot, and that. I'm really glad that we managed that we just happened to kind of line those two games up and some of the other games.
And I think something that I really respected in particular about Sean, our guest on that episode, was we had a fantastic episode with our first guest. It was great, but I think something about Sean's personality and continence, I had a lot of respect for how much he was able to come into a space with us, because we have such an established relationship and cadence of speech and the way we talk about games. What I loved about him, I don't know if you remember it this way, but I loved how much he was able to challenge us and hold his own space within our show, within our episode. Because, before we record these, or before we, and now in this case video, we have a quick conversation about what we want to cover. We almost do a pre-conversation and bullet out a few things that we know we want to talk about. And what I really respected about Sean was that he showed up ready to talk, and he really, on a couple of different points that either of us made, he was pushing back. Didn't matter if we were the host, didn't matter that he was in Yussef's home at the time, sitting in our living rooms. There was a real confidence and a real clarity to his take on the game, and he really did not like the game. And I thought that was really valuable to make such a powerful episode. I thought it was one of our better episodes.
Yeah,
it went long too. It was one of the longest episodes we've ever done because I did not want it to stop.
Absolutely, it was a great discussion, and I recommend you listen to it if you haven't already. Like I think we brought up a ton of good points about where the game succeeds and fails.
Yeah.
And just the idea of existing as a game about blackness in a space that's so white, video game space. So it really big theme, or during a discussion, or a big topic that came up repeatedly was the responsibility of a piece of black work to represent all of blackness, and the kind of the demand that we put on it to do so, because there's so little other opportunities to fill that gap, and there's so little other perspectives within or so little other so few examples of black media that can lend different angles and perspectives and socioeconomic places or political worldviews. It's always so rare that it then is unfairly almost asked to represent an entire zeitgeist and community.
Absolutely, and I think that's again one of the horrible effects of the white gaze on not just in this case black media or media that portrays black culture and all of its diversity. I think that's kind of a consequence of it. It's every time we see a story, or every time we the white, the non-person of color looking in on what is an outside voice or an outside narrative, we are so fucking myopic that we have to make it a story of an entire people or an entire personage.
And I think it's something everybody's guilty of, including the creators and people and the fans of the show. Of the game or the movie or the show. I was just talking to some people online about Insecure, which is a really good show. I recommend that one. Great soundtrack, awesome art design. And
but a recent episode has gotten the fans kind of talking,
exactly.
Right?
Essentially, there was not to spoil too much, but there's a plot arc where one of the characters is giving her boyfriend hookup, a blowjob, and then he comes in her face by accident. And it kind of causes a huge rift between them, and breaks them up. And previously in that episode, the main characters are kind of discussing blowjobs as this unique, problem in terms of the self-image of black women. And a lot of the fans were kind of disagreeing on that point and saying that we had moved past discussing blowjobs as this taboo or describing it as almost regressive to put so much onus on that particular sexual act.
Right.
And so what it came down to was some black women saying that's not important to me, and then the show writer saying, but that it is important to us, and that is part of our experience. So it's a case where because it's one of the the only show about specifically black women experience and led by black women, starring black women, that it's unfairly asked to speak to all black women.
Yeah.
And then you're well, no, that's her experience. That's the writers of the show experience, and we have to respect that. And then
it's not a problem of quality. It's not a problem of virtue. It's a problem of volume. Maybe we just need more black stories, right? Maybe we just need more diversity and not just black stories. Of course we need more black stories specifically in America, but I think also any stories of non-normative or of marginalized people. If we had more of them, we have
to basically get past the level of token and icon and
exactly. It's unfair.
One-dimensional representation that you can only get across so much in any story you tell. It's not impossible to demand to be kind of the vanguard and the person that sets the trend.
Exactly.
Because while it's very important that you do so, and it's great that Issa Rae is doing that with Insecure, she should only be one of many to come. So I think that's something that we saw with Mafia 3 for sure, and I think we're gonna keep seeing until it's not an issue anymore. And hopefully Insecure is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, right? And the beginning of a trend versus
I hope so.
or just I don't want it to be the 90s again, where we had Fresh Prince and Different World, and then there was and since then where the fuck are the black sitcoms?
I hear good things about Blackish. My wife watches that.
I do hear
from
good
time
things
to
about
time.
that. Yeah.
She's not like a regular watcher, but every time she watches, she's like, "Why don't I watch this show all the time?" So I've
hear
yet
it's
to
really
try
smart,
it.
yeah.
I liked the Netflix take on Dear White People, but I think that again is such a. It's almost not a good example within this category because it's specifically a show that does have black protagonists and centered in black stories, but it's a relational show. Whiteness is always at the door.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not an independent black story, or it's not an independent like whiteness is party to that story.
It's reactive.
It's reactive. So I think even in there, it doesn't actually serve as a solid example because it has to necessarily to play it safe with that white gaze.
Yeah.
It needs to sometimes venture into straight up parody.
Yeah.
And straight up it addresses its own tokenism, but it still is at times token. It's weird. It's I like the show. Like I enjoy it, but I don't think it's actually an example of what you're talking about.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
But we are getting a bit afield.
Yeah, but we are kind of back to the present day in a way.
We are.
Like Mafia 3 was rather recent in terms of
Yeah.
episodes, so it might be worth us talking about some stuff that's kind of changed since then. Like, how have we sort of changed our relationships with games in general? Like, do we feel a change? Do you feel a change?
I definitely do. I mean, obviously, I brought up that I've been writing, and I think that makes a big difference with how I approach games. Like, do I see them as, when I'm playing a game, I have to kind of consider whether there's pitchable material there, whether there's some ideas in there that I could then turn into an article. And so that's always something that's in the back of my mind, and that changes how I approach games. And there's always the guilty kind of question of whether am I just like wasting time right now when I'm playing a game purely for pleasure.
Sure.
But I do still want to retain that aspect of it because, I mean, writing I don't think is ever going to be a full-time job for me. It's just like at this stage, it's not.
You don't get rich writing.
It's
not just you. Nobody.
Nobody does.
Other than Stephen King.
And maybe it'll change in the future, but I doubt it. And I want to keep doing it, but I like.
Hope you do.
I like where thank you.
Yeah.
I like where it's at as a hobby for me.
Okay.
So I think that it's important to keep playing games that may not have value as a topic of discussion. But it's kind of interesting just how often you can sometimes come up with ideas like that you didn't think a game could provide. Like one of the last pieces I wrote was for Waypoint about Injustice 2 being kind of like a faulty superhero allegory.
Damn good article too.
That I didn't even think I was going to write a piece about that because it's like a silly cartoon fighting game.
It's true, yeah.
And but then the editor of Vice, Austin, hit me up and because they were doing a week about prisons and games, and I had written a piece about Prison Architect, and it's kind of the way it fails to simulate, I guess, all more like aspects of prison life that were more relevant to prisoners' health and freedom, and didn't really address the fact that prisons are currently being used to generate a shitload of very cheap to free labor and other income sources, and are basically a business. And so like kind of I was talking about prisons in relation to that game, and he asked me if I had any pictures for the prison week. So I kind of like took a walk and thought about this aspect of Injustice too, and it kind of coalesced into a really strong idea that I did not think was there at all when I first started playing it. Yeah. So I think as long as I keep playing games, then I'm going to generate ideas, and that's like a fun part of writing about them.
Yeah.
Because there's always, and I think the podcast has helped that muscle in my brain.
Absolutely.
Because we play a game, and then we're like
with a regular cadence, we're back to talk about it.
And we have to generate something to talk about. So that I think that's a creative muscle that has to be exercised.
Totally.
And we do with the podcast.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting to think about practice, right? The word practice, but also the verb practice, right? Like here we have established a really, really regular cadence of practice. And it's exactly as you were saying, like a practice of not just passively consuming, but of like digesting. And digesting the culture that we love so much, the interactive culture that we love so much. And for me, I definitely see my relationship with games changing. Partially because it's one of the forms of leisure, free time that I have that I control, i.e. I can put it down, I can pick it up. And I know there's games where I'm much more compulsive about my relationship with them. I'll like be zoned in. I'm like a super fan of a certain franchise. Like when Breath of the Wild dropped, that was my life.
Sure.
I played the shit out of that game.
Yeah.
Many nights where Jess slept alone, and like I'd come to bed like hours later, bleary-eyed, and just like pass out next to her, and she was like, "I miss my husband." I was like, "I miss the Moboklins, like the Moboklins, like
I need to kill them.
Just
keep
wait,
coming back,
darling.
Keep coming back.
One of these games every 6 years, maybe 8. Like you're gonna be patient with me. Welcome to the rest of your life until death do this part, motherfucker. No, but then there's other. Now I'm in this place where work it has intensified for me. Like my full-time job has intensified. When we started this podcast, I was not full-time.
Yeah.
The Atari gig was basically permalance. I'd work my hours that it took me to get my projects completed. And the time that I was with Killscreen was, of course, partnered in a business, so I'd work from wherever I was. Now, I'm in a full-time job, and now even that mental exhaustion of coming home after a day of work, there are still other things that I'm wanting to do with my free time, and writing is one of them, but not for like Vice or whatever. I've been working on a creative project for the last few months. I've dropped hints about it on previous episodes, but like. Games are one of the things that I have under my control, so I've meaningfully been cutting back on the time that I spend playing them so that I can make space for these other creative projects that I do want to complete. What that's done, though, is and actually, I think the relationship with this show, it's allowed me to accept my critical nature. I have a critical nature. I'm an optimist, and people talk to me about like a big muppet. I'm gooey, and I'm fun, and I'm extroverted, or whatever. But I have a critic in me, and I'm critical of things. I'm very when that part of my brain turns on, it's on. And I think this podcast and also the effect that it's had upon my play has actually allowed me to become more comfortable with that inner critic. And so now, with less time to play games, and with this critical self-acceptance, I can push it down more easily. If I'm really not enjoying a game, it's fucking dust, man.
Yeah.
And I don't feel this weird guilt to like, oh yeah, maybe after 20 hours if I don't like it, I'll like, blah. It's like, yo, you didn't grab me in the first 4 or 5 hours. That's all you got.
Yeah.
That's really all I'm going to give
enough.
you. Yeah, it should be enough.
Yeah.
So Injustice, as fun as it was, for example, our last episode, as fun as it was, it's a fighting game. And that's it. It has a tail, and it's not a very long tail. So that copy has already been given to my youngest brother. To on permanent borrow or whatever. Yeah. And I'm having an easier time letting go of these experiences that don't serve me. And really, especially as I moved away from the games industry as a profession, despite my critical nature, has actually really just allowed me to enjoy them as a player again, and not as a maker. There's something that changes, I think.
I think it probably does.
Yeah. I'm both culturally more critical of it, but I'm way less technically critical of it.
Yeah.
When I play a game now, I'm not like searching for like the designer as much. I'm just having fun in the game.
And I think we've probably tracked that also in our episodes, even because like I feel like the first few episodes there was a lot more of that insider baseball.
Yeah.
We keep using it. Of you kind of talking about the business side of things.
It's true, man.
And,
it's true.
Like, whether just kind of that aspect of the game's origin, and like whether it was successful in a kind of a market framework. And I think I'm always not on that level, just because of not only like not working in games, but also just in terms of interest.
Yeah, not interested.
Like,
exactly.
I'm all about the themes. I'm all about the narrative layer, and whether the game satisfies that aspect of my attention.
Yeah.
So like maybe like I've like pushed you in that direction.
Yeah, I think so. In
terms of like the way we talk about games.
Yeah.
And you've definitely like given me better like mechanical I think knowledge of games, and or at least an area where I can talk about it and find discussion points and like things to discuss.
Sweet.
And to talk about, to focus on.
Well, I promise you that when you become a famous writer, I'm going to steal all the credit. I'm just fucking with you, man. But yeah, I think we've run over time actually. But
That's fair.
At the same time, I think y'all out there, thank you so much on our 20th episode now. For anyone who has been listening this whole time, thank you. And you can look forward to now seeing us more. I think
Hopefully, yeah.
I think we can keep this up.
It's basically the same thing as if we were recording with audio.
Yeah.
And now you just see our faces.
But Yussef has some interesting ideas that are not just recording us and our faces, so you might be seeing some interesting new things to come. So whether you're watching us on YouTube or you're listening to us on the podcast, thank you so much. And I guess we should also thank at Old School Brian on Twitter, at Old School Brian on Twitter for doing the awesome theme music.
Yeah, and stay tuned for more fun video game hour, and I hope that we satisfy your curiosity.
Wait,
what's to come?
Yeah, what's to come? High five?
High five.
High five!